one of the terms that was used was it FOFO, fear of finding out, and I do believe there's some substance to this, that government departments really don't want to look at how bad the situation is, because they know that it's probably desperately more bad than what the public believe it is now. How do we create that awareness, or what is the solution? What I've been finding and what I've been seeing is successful, and where I take a lot of heart from, is how communities are stepping into the brink and taking on the role of the regulatory authority, and trying to hold them to account. And they do that very often, not by cooperating with the regulatory authority, but by actually constructively agitating against them. Conflict almost, in the sense that the community citizens are educating themselves around either pollution problems, around illegal waste, around unauthorised quarrying. They're looking at the environmental regulations that apply. They're teaching themselves, educating themselves in those, and then they're taking cases either in the courts or before we exited Europe, to the European Commission, and even to what's known to the United Nations. And all of that is having a knock-on effect in terms of driving improvements. There's no doubt about that. But there is still a real reluctance within government to address the issues. And the data centres is a classic example.
In the Republic?
No, and the data centres in Derry Strabane Council actually are a classic example, because, again, I wouldn't be opposed to the growth of data centres, but they have to be regulated. But when you, as a planning authority and a planning committee, grant something that you don't know the energy consumption, that you don't know the amount of emissions that it will give rise to, you don't know that the cumulative impact that individual development is going to have when you consider it along with all the other ones that are being approved, then that's a serious failure. That's not sustainable, because that'll build up problems for the future. And then it might be too late when our waterways are polluted, our climate is spiralling out of control. And what you need is some sort of more overarching view of how sustainable is this? What are the proper policies and legislation that we need to be taken into account? And the public need to be seen that you have addressed those properly. The data centre applications in Derry Strabane Council, it's absolutely clear, because it's absent from any assessment.
So there's no assessment done?
There's no mention. There's no assessment of, for instance, climate. Impacts on climate in relation to the report that was before the planning committee, the environmental impact assessment screening that was carried out. It just isn't there. But there are climate policies within what's known as the strategic planning policy statement that should have been taken into account. They weren't addressed. And when you have then a council saying, now they're not saying they didn't need to consider them, but what they're saying is we've taken into account all material planning considerations. That suggests to me that climate wasn't an issue that they needed to consider, but it very clearly was, and they very clearly know that. And that's when planning degenerates into a regime that the public will very seldom trust.
Yeah. Data centres, what is the main function of them? Is it AI, or is it?
Well, I think it's storage of energy for, like, I'm not very technical here now, but all of the stuff that you have on I don't use iCloud, but if you have used the iCloud, that energy has to be, or that information has to be stored somewhere. Similarly, social media, things like that, which I seldom use either. I'm not on Facebook or anything like that, but I do have a Twitter account, which I look at, but I tend not to interact anymore. But with AI, there's expected to be a major boom in the requirement for data centres for energy consumption, and that's also likely to have a knock-on effect for emissions.
Is that what you were talking about in the Republic?
Yeah, and I mean there.
So what's the? Yeah, it seems like it's having an effect.
Well, it is. In the Republic of Ireland, it's having an effect already, and like the opposition party there, Sinn Féin, and prior to that, it was the people before profit, TD Bridge Smith, who were arguing that you need a moratorium on these. You need to understand where the impacts of this sort of unregulated or uncontrolled growth, because what we're looking at is major energy consumption. In and around Dublin, data centres are nearly account for 50% of the energy demand or the electricity demand. So that is an issue. But the fact is that now the argument would be that the Irish government are not taking it seriously enough because they're still wedded to this sort of growth dynamic. But at least there are centralised government policies that allow councils to consider how they deal with data centres. That doesn't exist in Northern Ireland. The Department for Infrastructure, that has oversight of planning, should be producing an overarching policy on data centres to give our 11 councils guidance, and maybe to ensure that the cumulative impacts are examined in some way. But the Minister has dismissed that. Similarly, the Department for Department for Employment, I think it is, they have a responsibility for energy consumption, for energy security, but they have no interest in producing a policy or guidance that would assist the councils. The councils have literally been left to their own devices. So we don't know. We know 4 data centres have been approved in Derry, and maybe some more might be coming online, but we don't know what's being approved in the other 10 councils, and the other 10 councils probably don't know what's being approved in Derry or whatever else. So we don't know the major impacts that might be coming down the line from water consumption, electricity demand, climate emissions of greenhouse gases. So that's a serious failure in its sense itself, in that nobody is looking at the bigger picture here. But worse, the government bodies, the departments that should be, have washed their hands of it.
Yeah. The knock-on effect, though, to the people, how does that affect people? Because I think when I look at a data centre, I see it's a data centre, it's being built, and that's it. I never seen anything further than that until I spoke to you.
Well, if it's causing major issues in terms of energy or electricity demand, that can be having the knock-on effect on other developments being able to come online, and there have been reports down south on that about how it's actually now impacting on the delivery of housing and social housing. I absolutely have lost faith in the planning and environmental regulatory systems, but it's not just me that's losing faith in it. Sort of various studies over the last number of years would suggest the same. Like, for instance, there was a public inquiry carried out by probably one of the most powerful committees in the Northern Ireland Assembly, the Public Accounts Committee, back in 2022, and it recognised how poor planning was operating and how low public confidence was in the planning system. That generated a review by Derry Strabane Council, where they brought in consultants, and it found that 72% of the people that participated in that review had believed the planning system in Derry was broken. 75%. Even worse than that, 22% of those people believed it was broken beyond repair. And I can understand why they believe that, because it's not just that the planning system is repeatedly failing. It's not learning any late lessons from all the early warnings that it's had, but it's going beyond that into conducts that try and cover up that neglect, rather than admit, if you come clean about a problem and say, we got this wrong, here's how we're going to address this, and we'll not make that mistake in the future. But when you can't come clean, when you, for whatever reason, whether it's reputational damage or what, that you decide, well, we're not going to admit to our mistakes on this. We're going to rationalise why we ended up at this point. Then that's when you really start to lose public confidence and public trust. And it's very easy, to squander. Like for a government department, they squander public trust. It's really difficult to get it back.
Would you say then that is it individuals, or is it kind of like a party or a group that are responsible?
No, it's. I think it's institutionalized. It's how these organisations, these government organisations, whether it's in central government or whether it's local government like the councils, but it's like these institutionalised behaviours that have never been tackled, never been addressed. Nobody's ever been nobody's ever been held accountable, and over many years, those practices become normalised. And what's worse, I suppose, is when new people come in to those practices or into those organisations, they become socialised into the same way of working, to the extent that they may not even know that they're doing something wrong, because this is the way it's always been done now. Yeah. And there's nobody, in my view, that is capable of, no oversight body that seems to be tackling that systemic problem at a level where we're going to get improvement. The only people that are tackling it are local communities and ordinary citizens that see it happening and are no longer prepared to sit back and let the government continue. And from that perspective, that's where I am really heartened, because the level of citizen knowledge that the Gathering has been able to impart or empower people, empower groups, and allow them to go their way forward. Like a really good example of that was, because of the issues on the FOFO, I needed to understand environmental laws more. So I did a master's in environmental law in 2014, and I had a member of the public fighting a big campaign, pretty much on his own, a mining campaign, where he was trying to get a grasp of the law as well, and he was taking court cases, and he was relying on some advice or my help to sort of interpret the law. And at one stage, he was going to the Court of Appeal, I think, and he had written this argument, and he asked me to read it, and it dawned on me that he knows more about the law in relation to the habitats regulations now than I do. And that was not only empowering for me in the sense that I was thinking, here's somebody that has educated themselves, but empowering for him in that, like, we don't charge or for any advice. We're there to sort of try and assist people. But what we expect and hope is that that person will now impart that knowledge to the next campaigner, and it does work really well. So we can speak with a collective voice that is much more powerful than individuals being isolated and up against government.